Well, hello, everybody. Or go away message. I'm Amy Armstrong. For those of you who don't know me, please say hello in the chat if you're joining us live. Today, we have before us Morley Robbins and Kristan Kershaw as well this morning, a special treat. So Kristan is normally floating around behind the scenes in these weekly chats, answering questions between the chat between Morley and Sinead. But in Sinead's absence this week, Kristan has taken the opportunity to join in the fun. Hello.
Thank you for that intro. Morley, I get to see you on camera during a live thing, not just behind the scenes.
Oh, this is amazing. It's very different.
It's been so long since we've done one of these between you and I in some way. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Bit of a treat for the audience.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Amy, thank you for getting us started and really appreciate you being here. So let's get this party started.
Yeah, so thank you, Morley. So Morley, as we love to know, we know you love to spend your mornings consuming the literature. So you can come before us and share what you've learned. So tell us, Morley, is there anything that you would like to share with us today? What are your thoughts and wonderings about the world?
How much time do I have?
Yeah, half an hour.
Half an hour. Oh, okay. No, I think I never imagined that I would become such a devotee to this process. It's a revival of sorts for me. So it's been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed drinking coffee too. It's amazing. I didn't know what I missed the first part of my life, but there's a lot of confusion out there about copper and about retinol. And I want to just focus on the copper side for just a couple minutes. That, again, the social meme out there is, oh, you got to be careful. You don't want to become copper toxic. And it's just like, just want to shake your head and say, no, that's not the problem. Especially 2 years after, March 2020, where it's really a very different world out there as it relates to copper. But what I've learned recently that I think is really important for people to understand, we talk about the master antioxidant protein as ceruloplasman, and that's kind of why we're in the unique space that we're in. Well, there are two other important antioxidants in the cell. One hangs out in the cell itself, and another hangs out in the mitochondria. Well, the one that hangs out in the mitochondria is called melatonin, and it's actually a fascinating chemical that when you combine melanin with serotonin, you get melatonin. It's a very powerful antioxidant, and you can only make it happen when there's copper present. I'm not sure everyone knows that. And what I learned recently from a conversation I had with Dr. McCullough is that 95% of this, let me just make sure I get this right. 95% of its action, of melatonin's action, is dependent on light from the sun. It's absolutely fascinating. And then I couple that with a conversation that I had recently with, I'm not going to identify him by name, but he's an Australian practitioner who is also an alchemist. He's an ND, DC, naturopath chiropractor, but he's a practicing alchemist. And we were having what led to be a 2-hour conversation. And at one point he said, Morley, there's something you really need to understand about copper. I said, what's that? He said, it has a magnetic attraction for sunlight. Well, suddenly this whole idea about melatonin and light and all that begins to take on a completely different meaning in that context. But that wasn't even the biggest aha that I've had of late. that a lot of people know about the other antioxidant protein called glutathione. That plays a very important role inside the cell. Some researchers call glutathione a greeter, or it's greeting the heavy metals like iron and copper. But there's a lot of concern that people have glutathione deficiency. In fact, most of the articles I've read will talk about the known deficiency of glutathione in people around the world. It's become this recognized dynamic. Well, I was reading some research recently that approached it a little bit differently. And it didn't surprise me, but I think it would be important for people to know, is that if you have a glutathione deficiency, that seals the deal that you have a copper deficiency. You cannot have adequate levels of copper and be glutathione deficient. And the minute you get this designation that you have glutathione deficiency, the underlying premise is you have a copper deficiency. And so that becomes a very important piece of the puzzle as it relates to this constant din of commentary that people are copper toxic, when in fact, no, actually we're copper deficient. And I think it's important for people to begin to challenge that social meme that we've got to be careful not to become copper toxic. We've got to be careful that we really understand what is the state of copper in our body and what are the symptoms of it. And that's something that we study pretty carefully within the RCP community. But I think it was a very significant shift in my understanding to connect the dots between glutathione deficiency and copper deficiency that I'd never seen in the literature before. It was fascinating.
Yeah, wow, that is fascinating. So would it be fair to say that copper is what activates the glutathione?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair statement. And what I learned, and this will be for the gearheads, the folks who really want to get into the weeds of it, there's amino acids called cysteine and cysteine. And cysteine is spelled Cysteine, and cysteine is without that first E, it's Cystine. And the conversion of cysteine to cysteine is a requirement in order to make glutathione. The other requirement is you can't make glutathione without energy. Well, you can't make energy without copper. So it's a very interdependent process that a lot of people don't know about. And, there are people that go to health centers and they get a glutathione push. Well, that's great. You can do that. But what you're doing is you're really trying to make up for the fact that you have a copper deficiency. And that's really what we're trying to do in the RCP, is to correct the underlying issue so you get the full benefit of the mineral in its metabolic properties in the body. And
Morley, may I ask then, what would be the repercussions of pushing all this glutathione? Because we know that, it's really, it's a buzz out in the health world, this glutathione. Sure. So without the presence of that copper, and we're putting glutathione in, what's the repercussions of that?
That's a great question. Let's look at it from the standpoint of, say, a really fancy restaurant. We have an executive chef, and we have a head chef, and then we have all sorts of other chefs. There's sous chefs and all these other pastry chefs. And I would think of glutathione as a sous chef, a really good sous chef. And can a sous chef make pastry? No. Can a sous chef does what the head chef does? No. And so I think what we're focusing in on one chef, or as I call them, cuisine artists, so we can see the symbol for copper and the CU. But we're focusing in on one type of cuisine artist, when in fact, what we really need is the head chef at the top, which is ceruloplasman, that can express many different avenues of enzyme expression. And that's really what we're seeking to do with the RCP, is get it upstream and begin to create that switching station of activity.
So glutathione, although very important, doesn't run the kitchen.
Exactly.
Kristan,
No, that's just it. No, and the example, the analogy that I use is, again, stay with a fancy kitchen. There's a lot of metal in that kitchen, right? Think of the refrigerators, think of the stoves, think of the pots and pans, right? A lot of metal, it's actually a lot of steel. Most of it is steel or cast iron for the stove itself. Certainly the burners are cast iron. So let's stay with the stove. Does the stove know which pot to get out? Does the stove know which food to put in the pot? Does the stove know how much water to put in the pot to boil whatever we're going to do? Does the stove know how to turn itself on? No. Does the
just
stove
the
know?
tool.
Exactly. Right. And what's really fascinating is that in the world of conventional medicine, all the optics are on the stove and all the kitchen appliances, and we kind of bypass the cuisine artists, which are all the copper enzymes that make it happen. I just think it's a very striking gap in our awareness about how the kitchen of our cells work, which is the mitochondria. They're really, really important. And if we can't run the kitchen properly, well, then we're not going to make energy properly, and we're not going to produce the kind of results that we want in our day-to-day metabolism.
And so really,
I just love your analogies, Morley. I use them all the time. You've got great analogies. Sorry, Kristan, I cut you off. But what I was going to ask you too, Kristan, is, since we're live, is there, you're managing that live feed there, is there any questions too that you want to jump in from the audience?
There are a couple. I just want to add with the glutathione, if people are, whether it's IV, whether it's whatever, if I remember correctly, oral wise, it breaks down, doesn't it, Morley? If people take glutathione, is that the supplementation wise, doesn't it break down, or is that something else? But either way, if people are using it, it's a crutch. Like, it's not going to solve the underlying. And I think that's another aspect that people, there may not be necessarily huge fallout of having some in your routine, but it's not solving anything underlying that. You're giving yourself a temporary boost. You might feel better, but is there an underlying unexpected consequence of taking that? Quite possibly. And
yeah, and the part that I don't know, you're raising a really important point about what happens to it over time and the potential for breakdown. But if you've ever sprained your ankle, which I did do when I was running many years ago, you're very grateful for crutches, but you can't walk on crutches the rest of your life. And so crutches are wonderful. They're instrumental in recovery, but it's time specific. And I think if people get into a pattern of chronically using these crutches, that's when you begin to question, am I really getting to the foundation of the problem? That's the issue.
Yeah. All right, so questions. I'm going to pick a low-lying fruit. Sue is in New Zealand, and she said, what's the range for ceruloplasmin, please? We aim for around 0.3, I'm pretty sure, is the unit that you'll be in the same as what we are here in Australia, whereas in the US, the equivalent would be 30. So that's our goal. But we don't look at it in isolation. This is a really important, like, you can't just look at ceruloplasmin as the pinnacle of it, because at 30, if you looked at all the rest of the measurements, you could actually be highly inflamed, and the available copper still could be really low, even if you're right near 30 or 0.3. So don't.
Very important point. And again, one of the things we also look at is the relationship of serum copper to the ceruloplasmin. And ideally, that ratio should be 3.33. Ideal numbers, 100 for copper, 30 for ceruloplasmin, the ratio 3.33. And there's a colleague of ours, he's a chiropractor in Australia, who's doing some fascinating digging into the ceruloplasmin standards in the pathology circles. And he came across an article a couple of years ago that he's now trying to track down, where it was connecting the number of chronic conditions to a ceruloplasm below 20. But he stayed with it, and what he's uncovered is, I think, a really striking difference, that in Australia and New Zealand, what's considered low ceruloplasmin is 24. Here in the States, what's considered low ceruloplasm is 14. That's an oh my gosh moment. That's a huge difference. 24 versus 14. So now he's going into other pathology circles in Europe and South America just to find out what's the consistency or lack thereof in how ceruloplasm is reported as adequate, inadequate. And I think we're going to get some very interesting numbers that are going to really uncover the just enormous gap in understanding about this master antioxidant protein.
And Morley, is ceruloplasm like copper in that the amount recommended has come down over time?
That's a great question, Amy. I'm not sure that the amount has changed in terms of coming down. I think what may have changed is our access to measure its activity level as opposed to its availability. So let me explain what I mean. So when we're measuring the level of a protein, how much is in the blood, we're basically measuring its height. When we're measuring its activity, its functional expression, that's its IQ. Well, there's a big difference between someone's height and someone's IQ. And to my knowledge, the height or level hasn't changed for ceruloplasmin. What we don't know is how has the function of that protein changed from 1948 to the present day. Again, it's very difficult to get testing done of the activity level, certainly here in the States and in parts of Europe. I think it's difficult also down under. I don't think it's readily available to practitioners. That's the unique distinction. Level is different than IQ. And we're able to get level. I think there needs to be more done to get access to the IQ of the enzyme.
Yeah, that activity is so important.
Yeah.
Well, that leads into a great segue into one of the questions. So Aries, I apologize if I have not done you right by that, but the question is, so can taking desiccated liver, copper supplements, and eating grass-fed beef liver not increase daily copper requirement levels, thus causing copper toxicity? So I think it's, if you're not utilizing it, will that cause copper toxicity, if I'm understanding that question correctly?
Right.
The copper toxicity thing.
Right, the copper toxicity thing. Again, we've been trained that our bodies are evil and they're just rogue actors on the stage. And I don't think that's the case. I think when we have the proper nutrients, the body really does know what to do. And as it relates to this whole dynamic of ceruloplasmin, what is of paramount importance are good sources of copper and good sources of retinol. Preformed vitamin A, very, very important. And that's not easy to find in the diet. And I think what this individual is asking is, if I really focus on that, is it going to become a problem? Well, no, the body, there isn't an innate intelligence in the body. It knows when it has too much of what it has. It'll trigger mechanisms to bring it into homeostasis. The term copper toxicity is really, it's a term that's used in the hair tissue mineral analysis, and it's a term that's used in terms of blood analysis. What's important for people to understand is that within the bloods, 1% of copper is found in our blood. The other 99% is found in our tissue. Where's the highest concentration of copper in the body? It's in our bone marrow, where red blood cells are being made at 2.5 million per second. That's a pretty significant level of activity. We make 2 trillion red blood cells every 24 hours. And so that requires a lot of copper to support the iron recycling program. Well, people don't talk about that in the copper toxicity circles. They've got an electron microscope on the 1% in the blood, but are not asking the question, so what chemicals is this person being exposed to that's blowing up ceruloplasman that's causing copper to come out of that protein? That's the most important question. And it requires layers of questioning and layers of analysis to begin to get to that. And this very knee-jerk reaction of, oh, you're copper toxic, that's not an accurate statement. There's just too many mechanisms involved to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
That was an awesome explanation and coverage. Thanks. Don't know how we can follow that, Amy.
With more questions, perhaps. I think we've got a time for a couple more, Kristan, if there's any out there.
Yep. So Ivana, one of our students currently, said Dr. Purser is big on copper toxicity, and he is also selling expensive glutathione supplements. Interesting.
Well, I think that's fascinating. I think this there's a notion that there's no good form of copper supplement, and you can only get copper through these antioxidant mechanisms. That's not how Mother Nature designed our system. We were never designed to be taking sophisticated enzymes as supplements. I mean, it's just the process of creating glutathione. It's a multi-step process. It's a very, very sophisticated, at least as I've studied it. And I don't know. Now that we know that glutathione deficiency equals copper deficiency, well, why don't we go back to the base issue? Do we have foods that are adequately supplied with copper? Well, that would imply that there's copper in the soil. Does the soil have adequate reserves of copper, or is there some blocking agent that might be getting in the way through the food system, through the farming system? And there are blocking agents, NPK, blocking agent, Roundup, blocking agent. Those are not the only two. And so we need to be aware of that. Is there a blocking agent in the food system? The biggest one is high fructose corn syrup. Sugar in general will block copper. It'll use up copper tremendously. So it's important for people to know that there are these recognized mechanisms. And the analogy that I was sharing with Kristan before we got started is, it's as though the system, picture your house being your body. Well, the system's come and they've locked up your front door. Well, then they've blocked your driveway. Well, then they've put a fence around your property. Well, then they've put a roadblock to your street. And you can't copper cannot get access to your body with all the layers of blockade that have taken place in the farming system, in the food system, and in the pharmaceutical system. It's not openly known what are these agents. We do our best to try to educate people, but this is not taught in practitioner school. They're not taught about this. And so it's incumbent upon us to begin to be more aware of not just the vital need for this mineral, but what we can do to overcome the blockades that are out in the system to prevent us from getting access to it.
Yeah, thank you, Morley. It's such powerful information. Thank you for sharing your learnings and your wonderings around that today. So I guess it's probably time to switch gears with only a few minutes to go. And Kristan, maybe talk a little bit about the training and Group 16. Doors are open. Tell us more.
Absolutely. It's pretty exciting for Morley and I mean, for all of us behind the scenes who support the RCP. Registrations have been open for a little over a week, and so far we have well into the 60s worth of registrations. So thank you everyone who's signed up so far. Most of those are new students. There's a couple of people coming and joining us for a refresher, We've actually got Sue live in the chat, the one who asked about the New Zealand range. She said, I'm excited to be joining class number 16.
That's great. Wonderful.
So we don't have time to answer your question, but I did want to acknowledge that, and I'll come back and if one of the team, I see Jackie, one of our consultants, is in the chat as well, and there's a few others who have joined us live. So if any of you are able to help Sue answer that, that would be awesome. We're just so excited because every time we do this training, it evolves a little bit. And so with group 15, who we're currently working with, it's absolutely beautiful to see their learning, to see how we evolve with the support with tutors like Jackie, who make the journey of the student just, it helps them. There's so much information that we deliver realistically, and we want, whether people come in with a background in science, whether they need to unlearn and relearn because they're practitioners in another area, there's a lot of diversity in those who we bring into the training. And with the tutorials that we've now got in place and the materials that we're delivering, both in recorded materials, Morley and I have gone through and refreshed a number of the materials for group 15, and it just continuously evolves. So it's pretty exciting to see where the group 15 students are at and knowing that that's going to continue as we go into group 16.
It's very, very exciting. You know, when we had a class of 60, we thought, oh my gosh, this is so many people. When you know, group 15 is 134 people, we're anticipating we're going to break 200, and we're going to cap it. If it gets too big, we're going to have to cap it, just because we want to do due diligence and really be able to service the needs of the student body. But this is a very exciting event for us to see this kind of response with just a week of open enrollment. We are kind of crossing our fingers and holding our breath to see what the actual numbers are going to level out between now and end of June. But we're very excited about what we're seeing in the way of a response right now.
Yeah, that's super exciting numbers to see this early in the piece. So, Kristan, we're still in early bird.
Yes.
How much longer is that for?
So early bird will be finishing on the 16th, so Monday of next week. And that will be, now I don't have the details in front of me, it's actually on the training page. I'll make sure that that's in the link here, but it'll be, I think it's, oh, now I'm putting myself in the spot, I should have double checked. What I'm not sure on is whether it was Monday the 16th, my time, which I think is the thing. So I think it finishes on midnight Morley's time, which is Monday afternoon for us.
That sounds right.
It's about 6 days away from now, let's call it. And so I'd strongly encourage, you can save yourself some money, but also you get early bird access, literally. So you can go and start looking at the pre-reading that we recommend and start chipping away. We don't start the live classes until July. So you can really get a head start on your learning from a point of view of there is a lot to take in. So the more that you take some time now to start drip feeding that information in, reading, some of the classes are available straight away, but there's also pre-reading and pre-watching that we encourage. So if you are thinking about doing the training, it really makes more sense to sign up sooner than later from a point of view of you preparing for you. I can't tell you how much easier it makes the journey as a whole if you chip away at it, rather than thinking, oh yeah, I'll cruise in at the end. And people are fine doing that too, but it can be quite overwhelming. Amy, you've joined us in early groups and then later and done the refresher. You've seen the change of the information. So we do a lot to help people take it in, but bottom line is it's a lot of information, right?
Yeah, so, and I guess, so just to recap there, the benefits of getting in now and I can vouch for personal experience, to have early access to that information and to start to really absorb, you know, even getting into the terminology that's used and the science language is just so valuable. So there's that. There is definitely, you know, a fairly significant saving cost-wise to get in on the earlier bird price. And thirdly, you know, we are getting to the point where there is potential for these numbers to be capped for this round. So, you know, if you are thinking about it, yeah, I would highly suggest getting in. But I think it is just completely worth doing to have access to that information and start, you know, watching. I used to put the headphones in and put Morley on a video and listen to him and watch him while I walked every morning, just to start to really engage with some of the information and start letting it sink in. So some definite benefits there. Well, I guess it's probably time to wrap us up. Morley,
I'm going to jump in.
Oh, you
You
are?
ran away.
Okay.
What have you been up to, Amy Armstrong? So for anyone who doesn't know, Amy is
absolutely.
One of our consultants who's been around for you were in group 4 originally, were you not?
Yeah, a little while now.
Yeah. So tell me, you've been doing some interviews, I hear.
I have actually. Thank you for reminding me about that. I was ready to wrap us up and end things. But yeah, I have been sitting down each week with some of our wonderful RCPs from all over the world and learning about their stories and their own health journeys. And as fate would have it, how they found the RCP, their success with the RCP, and you know, how they've gone on with their future studies at the Institute. So it's been really fascinating, a really fascinating insight into both how the RCP has helped, you know, real people and the path then that led them onto the Institute training. So I think there's a lot for, you know, for people who are considering either of those things. There's a lot to gain by just having a listen to those interviews that we're going to be you know, bringing out in future. And you know, they're only short, they're only 25 minutes long, but some really valuable information that might just you know, get you over the line with your thinking about you know, coming on board with the RCP or the Institute training.
Well, Amy, thank you for your devotion to that. It's going to be a really powerful library of information for people going forward. It's a very special service that you're providing the community. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for allowing me to do it. It's, as I said, it's been a really cathartic experience, and just you know, it's just to hear from people in real life. I think there's so much value in that. Okay, well, time to wrap things up then. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's joined live and everybody who's going to join us on the replay.
Absolutely. It's been really nice to be out in front of the camera for the odd occasion that I crawl out. I used to do this quite regularly, so it's nice to pop in, and I've been in the chat too, shockingly. I'm sure many would be amused to know I was doing both.
How do you do that?
Multi-skilled you are.
Multitasking genius that you are. Yes, indeed.
Not quite to the level I normally would be where I can fully focus on it, but you know, I'm still there. So thank you, Amy. And Shanae, we missed you, but we had fun.
Well, very good. Well, thank you all for making this happen. It's always fun to have these little chats. Very stimulating for everyone, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Morley.
All right. Until next time. See you later, everyone.